Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Well, welcome back. Let's go around and say our names. My name is Jim.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer.
Umehoshi.
Scott.
George.
Justin. Patrick. Steve. Nicholas. Tyra. Patrick. Randy. Greg.
Good morning, my name is Tom.
Jonas. Darren.
Paul. Jack.
Carl.
Jay.
Roger. Paul. Robert.
Deanna.
My God, we don't have...
And Deanna.
Diana. Deanna is over there, and Diana is here. She's my doppelganger. If she says something rude, it's not really me, but anyway.
Who all is here for the first time?
Very first time. Several people.
Great.
And I'm shocked. I am shocked and appalled to hear that we don't have like a multiplicity of Jims, Pauls, and what else did we have before?
We had a few Patricks, though.
We did? How many Patricks are there? 2 Patricks?
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay, then I'm satisfied.
So easy. And this is the unforgettable Diana, our great friend from the Soka Gakkai International. She's a doctoral student at California Institute of Integral Studies. What is your topic? What is your theme?
Today?
No, for your thesis.
Haven't figured it out yet. This is I'm having a problem. I have like a little notebook with about 30 different topics, and I'm thinking, well, each one of these could be probably 800 pages, so I haven't decided yet.
When do you have to decide?
Yesterday.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, well, it's okay. They're giving me flexibility about that. So
The past, present, and future are all one.
this is true. So it is the same. Actually, it's really tomorrow. That's what I always understood working for government, that if something was due at 5 o'clock on Friday, that was the same as saying it was due at 8 o'clock on Monday morning. So fortunately, I was already tenured, if you will, in government before that policy took effect for myself. So I have one sheet of paper, which you may take or not, depending upon your predilection. It's entitled Observing the Precepts. And I wanted to talk about that. Can I go ahead and talk now? Are you sure?
You're on.
Okay. I want to talk about this from the Nichiren Buddhist perspective, but first, for those who knows absolutely nothing about Nichiren Buddhism and chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, raise your hand proudly. Right on. You know, the vast majority of Buddhist traditions have at some, let's just say that many Buddhist traditions have as their sort of practice basis silent meditation or sitting meditation, and Nichiren Buddhism is one of the few that does not. It's an active meditation. We chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, and Myoho Renge Kyo is, in addition to being literally the title of the Lotus Sutra with the pronunciation from 13th century Japan, it's also Nichiren Daishonin, who is the founder of this form of Buddhism in 13th century Japan. He revealed in his own life for himself, and then shared that with all of humanity, that Myoho Renge Kyo is actually the essence of life. It is the deepest understanding of how the world works, and that in a sense, one could say that Nam-myoho or Myoho Renge Kyo could be construed as Buddhahood, Buddha nature. It could be construed as, for some people, you might even say it's kind of like Godhead as opposed to God. The Zen concept, not necessarily Zen philosophy, but the Zen as a concept. This was his idea, his realization. And some of the important things to know about Nichiren Daishonin, one is that he was very much a profound advocate for the common person. And in 13th century Japan, most common people were at the mercy of the government, which was pretty evil and cruel. There was a lot going on, a lot of invasions from other countries. There was a lot of famine. There were a lot of problems with other religious sects that were in collusion, if you will, with the government. And Nichiren, he always said he never founded a school. He said, I am not a founder of any school of Buddhism. It's other people who consider him that. But what he wanted was really to find a way to bring Buddhism, the belief that each person is inherently the Buddha, to every person, including people who basically didn't have the luxury to sit in a monastery or didn't have money to have their own personal priest, which, at the time in 13th century Japan, there was a lot of that going on, wealthier people. So his real focus was on the common person, and his belief that chanting Nam, which is a contraction of Nam Mu, which from Namaste, etc., is a devotion to this mystic law, to the Lotus Sutra, or the teachings that are within the Lotus Sutra, not necessarily the sutra as a thing itself, was really, I think, it was a deeply profound and ultimately revolutionary act for 13th century Japan, and it nearly cost Nichiren his life on a number of occasions because of it. His basic belief is that one should never seek this law outside of oneself, and that includes never follow a priest if the priest doesn't really get it, that the priest puts himself between you and your enlightenment. And that was an issue certainly for 13th century Japan, and in fact in our organization, Soka Gakkai International, it was also an issue with the connection between the lay organization, which has now 12 million members throughout the world, with the priesthood, from which we were so-called excommunicated in 1990 because of the strong belief that the priesthood did not have the key to our enlightenment, and the priesthood felt that they did. So we are not connected with the priesthood. We do not have a clerical hierarchy of any kind. We have leaders in the organization who we believe have responsibility to care for people. I'm a leader at sort of a neighborhood level, and I also have a role in the national GLBT organization. So that's a little bit of background about where this comes from. I practiced at one time, for a long time. I searched a lot of different religions for myself, various spiritual practices from the range of Christianity to sitting Zen meditation. And I never really found for myself that the kind of the strength, the determination, the clarity, the focus that I have with practicing Nichiren Buddhism. It really fits my temperament really well. And as Jim so thoughtfully reminded us, that I'm a PhD candidate at California Institute of Integral Studies, and I'll remind those of you who are here from before that it's your fault that I'm in school, because I found myself unable in many respects to answer some of the questions that you folks have had, and I really realized that I needed to deepen my understanding of Buddhism and Buddhism generally. And it's been a very rewarding and challenging experience for me because my nature is one of argumentation, and to be able to talk with people from different points of view and really dialogue has been a personal. It's been a great personal growth experience for me. I've had my ass kicked by my own advisor, and that was very exciting. I've had fights with him in class, and then, I've really realized, what is the sort of the middle way of being a Buddhist practitioner, when to shut up, so for me. And because otherwise I'm not going to learn. If I keep thinking, yes, but, what am I going to hear from anybody else? So, I want to say, before I talk a little bit about the concept of precepts in Nichiren Buddhism, is that, this is really my opinion, and I don't necessarily speak for the entirety of SGI organization. I certainly don't speak with individual practitioners, because I think everybody's experience is really different. So I want to say that at the outset. So if you want to call up my organization and tell them what I said, please don't. No, I'm just kidding. the idea of precepts, I've always been kind of, I don't know if the word is bothered, but confused, if you will. Nichiren Daishonin, in various writings to his followers, this is the sort of main mode of the sort of teachings that we have, are in the form of letters from Nichiren to his followers, and in some cases, letters from Nichiren to the government of Japan. I've always been sort of confused about what the precepts are from a Nichiren perspective, and precepts being, in sort of its basic understanding, the idea that you keep certain modes of behavior, practices that help keep you on the right path, help you develop yourself. And, the history of precepts being, in some cases the men had more precepts than women, and monks had more than nuns, and then they've been channeled in different directions. And I think each different kind of Buddhism, each different Buddhist movement has different ideas of what the precepts are. And ultimately, for me, I've really tried to understand that from Nichiren's perspective, because he talks about the precepts, but he doesn't really say what they are. And I've really come to understand that his concept of precepts is actually a precept to understand that all precepts are really rituals, and they don't have necessarily a meaning in themselves. And what this really points to was Nichiren's idea that we should always be focusing on what is the essence of what we're trying to do. Yeah, it's great to chant Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, and that's really important. But if you can't do that, are you still not a Buddhist? And Nichiren never prescribed specific actions that one should take in front of an altar. He never said you had to hold the beads this way. He never said you should offer these kinds of things. He said that if you made offerings, that was really great. But he never said that you had to do that in order to be considered a Buddhist or to be a practitioner. And I think this article here really kind of clarified for me some things about precepts from this sort of from what Nichiren was trying to do. He referred to other forms of Buddhism and their precepts, and then talked about, but no matter what, having faith that your life is the Buddha, that you are already the Buddha, that it's a matter of you being awakened to the fact that you're a Buddha. That is the most important, if you will, precept. So, I think over time, by the time Nichiren was around, a lot of Buddhism had just died off in China completely. It was started flourishing in Japan, but it was dead for all intents and purposes in China, from whence Buddhism came to Japan, also through Korea. And so the idea of precepts by the time Nichiren came around was it wasn't so much important for the average person. There were monastic rules, those kinds of precepts, Vinaya, you can pronounce it, I can't. Thank you. These were not really relevant to the average person. They didn't have time to do this. These were people in 13th century Japan who didn't have enough to eat, or they were being harassed by the government, or beheaded by the government, or whatever. So the idea of precepts was really irrelevant in a way to the average person. I think that what Nichiren was really trying to get at was when we see that every moment has the potential for goodness or badness or Buddhahood, or lightness or darkness or Buddhahood or hell or whatever, and that each moment is a choice, which is where he was coming from, that the idea of precepts is actually, for the average person, is less important than just simply being aware of the choices that people make. Nichiren was really a strong advocate of the individual's inner wisdom, that even the lowliest farmer or fisherman would be able to derive great benefit from practicing simply by chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, that they could change their life. And it wasn't a matter that you had to follow these things and you had to go in this progression and you had to practice these things and so forth. It was really basically, Nichiren pointed to the inherent Buddhahood of every person. He took as one of his strongest sort of philosophical mentors, if you will, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging, which he goes by a number of names. But in English, Bodhisattva Never Disparaging, who always acknowledged the Buddha nature in every person, regardless of how that person would treat him. And Nichiren really tried to live that principle out. He never admonished followers per se. He may have been very strict with them because of he felt that what they were doing was going to ultimately be harmful to them or get them in trouble. But he never put down a practitioner. He never accused them of stupidity. He really valued deeply the inner ability, the inner capability of every human being. And so that Nichiren's effort to really bring a practice to the common people was a way for them to wherever they were to become the fully blossoming individual that they could possibly be for whomever that was and whatever way that was important for them. I think that getting back to this idea of rituals for just a second, and then I'd like to open it up for some dialogue. Shakyamuni Buddha preached according to people's capacities. We know that, and each of the sutras, are a reflection of that. And his effort to bring people all into the same place was really what led to, I think, some of the precepts was really to help encourage people to bring their level of understanding and development up. Nichiren Daishonen's confidence in people, and I think I just mentioned this, to be guided by their own inner wisdom is really, he said, was unlocked by chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. And that by activating this principle of Myoho Renge Kyo in one's life, that one is able to not only see Myoho Renge Kyo at work in the world, one becomes awakened to the principle in one's life and in all phenomena around you, but also you're able to harness that for even greater and greater development of wisdom. So with that, I think I just want to leave it for the moment. If you had questions about this particular thing, if you've been not paying attention to me and reading instead, which is perfectly fine, I think that's it. So I leave it to you to... Oh, come on. I know you people have something to say. Everybody always has something to say. Yes?
No. It's interesting because I've been starting to do Zen Buddhism because it's what's available. It came to me, right? Mm-hmm. And recently 11 members of the Sangha took the precepts, which I found very interesting because I thought, wow, I couldn't do that yet because I break the precepts all the time. Mm-hmm. And then some of them said, well, we were more flexible about it, as you said, but for me the precepts seemed reasonable. Mm-hmm. I mean, not to kill is a very reasonable thing. And when you spoke earlier, even not to lie, about him saying no precepts, it's interesting because I didn't find that the precepts they didn't seem austere. Mm-hmm. It didn't seem like that you couldn't live your life as a common person, because I think most common people already accept the precepts as a value system. Unless we mean don't kill any animals and become completely vegetarian, but then gather nuts maybe. But the idea was that what I find interesting about your talk is that I don't find that the precepts would hinder you, in your Buddhist past. And so to say that we don't have precepts is very interesting. I hadn't thought of that before. So why wouldn't you just have some guidelines of how we choose to behave?
I think what this article stresses, especially towards the end, is that actually the precepts become an effect of one's practice. That it's not a cause that one makes per se. The cause is in valuing your own life deeply. And that as a result of that, it will naturally become part of you to not kill other things. The more you value your life, and the more you recognize and acknowledge and cherish the Buddha nature within, see it for what it really is, the true self, then the effect of that is actually to observe the precepts. I think it's not a matter of not having precepts per se, but as precepts as a mode of behavior, that these are, either rules or guidelines or whatever. The guideline is really, from Nichiren's point of view, is to value your life, and that everything else occurs because of a result of that. Once you start seeing that when you make good causes, positive causes, value-creating causes, by the way, parenthetically, Soka Gakkai International, Soka Gakkai means Value Creation Society. Once you start creating value, you will naturally that will start manifesting in these other ways. One of the things in here, it says at the very end, people previously mired in cycles of behavior involving, for example, substance abuse, irresponsible sexual conduct, or violence, or less dramatic but ultimately no less destructive behavior based on lack of self-respect, have connected to a genuine sense of inner worth. As this awareness takes root, it naturally grows into an awareness of the equal dignity inherent in the lives of other people. Without a conscious effort to follow particular rules of conduct, the determination to put this respect for the sanctity of life into action leads to a way of life in conformity with the ideals expressed by the precepts.
Diana, I think it might help to say that, as I understand it, this is a big split between two ways of practicing the Dharma, the gradual path and the sudden path, which in some ways are the only two forms of Buddhism. This discussion between Theravada, Mahayana, and so forth is somewhat of a red herring. That on one hand, it is claimed that we need to observe certain precepts and certain practices in a certain order to purify the mind. And then the other tradition is the mind is already pure, and we just have to find some way for that to self-manifest.
Right.
And specifically around the time of Nichiren, there's a similar teaching from the Pure Land tradition and from Dogen in the Zen tradition. The Dogen would say, I sit because I am a Buddha, to manifest the Buddha nature.
Right.
And in the Pure Land tradition, I recite the name of Buddha because I know I'm already embraced by the love of Buddha and Amida. And there's this very, to me, a Japanese sense of enclosing everything into one thing. Japanese culture seems to think if you can do one thing really well, everything is in that. I think that's also Buddhist in some way. But for others who know other forms of Buddhism that are talk of purification. These have not been resolved in the history of Buddhism, and they're often found in the same text. One image is that enlightenment is like refining ore. You take the rock and you have to do something with it to get the gold or silver out of it. And the other thing is like finding a rare jewel in the middle of a huge amount of manure or shit, if you like. You just
I prefer shit, yes, thank you. No, you're absolutely right. And, I had thought about when I was originally going to come today is to talk about a concept called the mutual possession of the 10 worlds, which kind of is actually really related to this, which is, the 10 worlds being hell, hunger, animality, anger, blah, 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 all the way up to Bodhisattva Buddhahood. And then it was actually not Nichiren who came up with this idea that actually each world contains all other possibilities for the other 9 worlds. So in a sense, what he was trying to say was that there's Buddhahood in hell and Buddhahood. And that even in the depths of complete and abject suffering, we can find some sort of a realization that really turns the whole thing around. That actually our efforts to simply see where we're at and determine that we don't want to be there is itself the cause for something greater. And I think that's really getting at this idea of, the idea of original enlightenment and sudden enlightenment, and that it's, and really what this is trying to, the idea of precepts being sort of a linear progression, or at least a series of steps that you go through in order to become enlightened. Nichiren didn't accept that as a correct view. His idea was that was not correct. I think we could talk about it as the difference And I agree with Roger that it's an issue that really is kind of it's a big distinction between different kinds of Buddhist practices, or Buddhist thought, if you will. So thank you for sharing that. I knew you'd have to say something good. Yes?
I kind of follow the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, which doesn't have 5 precepts. It has a 5 mindfulness training instead, and it's kind of reformulated so it's not really specified with not that much. It's more about being aware of what you do and the choices you have, as I see it. I was very weak this summer in the Plum Village, and I chose to do the 5 mindfulness training because I heard it before and so on. And for some reason I've chosen to try to be vegetarian since then. Some people wouldn't call it vegetarian. They say vegetarians don't eat meat. I try not to order meat. I eat family style. Other people may order it and I may eat it because I'm sharing my food and they are sharing their food. And it's very interesting if vegetarianism would be defined as not eating meat, because it would rather be vegetarian is somebody who eats vegetables, because a carnivore shouldn't be defined as somebody who does not eat vegetables, right? It's a personal choice in many cases, but in a way, his way of formulating the 5 precepts of the 5 mindfulness training gives me a choice always. You can't avoid killing. You eat a vegetable, you kill something living. You can be aware of that, and you can appreciate it. And the same thing with all the other things, the other precepts that we are formulated at being awareness. That that's what you need to add to that things. You may do them. But my realization is that if I kind of break these or I don't follow the mindfulness suggestions, it's kind of, well, it really affects me negatively because of my attitudes to it and how I deal with it. And it's kind of self-destructive in some cases. But with the choice, you're aware of the effects of what you do on yourself. And that is a great thing for me, I think. I think it still keeps the word precept for what the bhikkhus and what the monks do, and they have like 250 and they recite them and so on. So it's kind of making it more available for the lay person, I think, by calling it mindfulness training and saying these are not laws. But
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that. Who else?
What do you think is the impulse to sort of accrete rituals in one's spiritual life?
Oh boy, there's a whole kind of interesting series of dialogues that I've been reading about the difference, the relationship with myth and ritual and the meaning of ritual in life and so forth. I mean, for me, getting up in the morning and making a pot of coffee is a ritual, and it's a very important ritual for me. And I don't know. I think that there's solace in ritual. There's a sense of recognition, like I've done this before and it feels good to do the same thing again. I think also from the standpoint of certainly from the Nichiren tradition, the rituals actually came after Nichiren lived. The rituals were developed afterwards, and they really weren't specific in a way to Nichiren Buddhism. I mean, the fact that we have, we use juzu beads basically is common to almost all forms of Buddhism, or certainly many. And the fact that people in Japan, at least, sit on the floor and chant on their knees, that's kind of a traditional thing in sort of all kind of Japanese sorts of religious practices. The rituals have helped, I think, a lot of people, including myself, create the environment where a sort of a recognizable, concrete, focused time for a time and manner in which I chant and pray every day. I think that the danger for myself is in holding the rituals as somehow as important as the teaching, or as important as the fundamental things that Nichiren was trying to do. And I think that's a danger of all religions. I don't think that's endemic to Buddhism at all. So, they have an important function. It's an incredibly important function, but they aren't. It's like they aren't the thing that has the meaning. That they don't necessarily hold the meaning in and of themselves. And I think it was one thing I wanted to share. In 1930, when our organization, which is really phenomenal, was created, the lay organization was created by an educator named Makaguchi. And he personally became aware of and committed to the values expressed in Nichiren's Buddhism for the purpose of education, actually. Valuing. This is an education model not unlike Montessori in a way that's still used in Japan, that really works with the capabilities of each individual person or child and really tries to, instead of trying to apply an across-the-board way of teaching children, is to work with each child and what their natural tendencies are and encourage that to develop and flourish. He then, from using this as sort of an education model, he realized that actually it was really important for people generally to have this point of view, that to value the innate ability of every human being at whatever level they're at. He basically, in a way, I don't know how to say this without sounding he was like a dictator, but he really prescribed, if you will, the ritual of reciting 2 sections of the Lotus Sutra, as the priest did. The priest had been in existence since 13th century Japan. He prescribed for the lay people that all lay people should recite the sutra as well. Prior to that point, only the priests did it, and it was a way of sort of separating the priests from the lay people. There were things that the priests did that the lay people could not do. And he was adamant that people who practice this Buddhism should recite the sutra. This is a ritual that's relatively recent, but has enormous impact, I think, on the issue of, you know, the nature of religious hierarchy and the truth that all people are equal, and actually implementing the idea that all people are equal. This was actually, in one way, one could say that this, you know, the very beginning of this organization set in motion the wheels for it to split from the priesthood. Because the priesthood never wanted, in a way, the lay people to be equal to them. And, you know, this is not unheard of. This is a common problem. I'm sure we can all point to different things that would have us believe that, yes, that's correct. So, you know, in this way, this ritual was very important for the individual believer to take on in sort of the history of this organization. But in and of itself, as a ritual, I mean, does it have meaning? I'm not so sure. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Thank you.
Did you say earlier that the precepts are rituals too?
They could be construed as rituals, or they could be construed as expedient means, if you will, according to the capacity of the people. It depends on your point of view. If you're a person who practices the precepts, they may not necessarily be considered rituals. If you're a person who doesn't, like myself, practice the precepts, I might see them as ritual. Ritual in the sense that they're guidelines to help you develop, but they aren't the thing themselves. They aren't the teaching themselves, per se. In our point of view, like I was explaining to her, that I think that, you know, the precepts are actually the effect of valuing your life. You'll naturally, it's not something that you consciously practice, because they naturally come out of your life once you get to this deeper level within. Does that explain it?
Kind of.
Did I offend you?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm easily offended, but no.
Damn.
It seems a little fuzzy still. So I understand the distinction of ritual as sort of something that points you towards the true heart of what you're looking for, focusing on. That it's not the thing itself, but I don't quite see the precepts.
Well, it depends on what precepts we're talking about, too. I mean, you know, the 200 for men and the 500 women, I'm pretty sure that those could be considered rituals. I think, you know, and maybe it's a matter of semantics. I'm not sure. It's a precept to me is something to be followed. And Nichiren would say there wasn't anything to be followed other than the belief that your own life is Buddha. Does that explain it a little?
Yeah.
We can talk more.
Yeah.
Yes. Did you have your hand raised?
No.
Who had their hand? You did. Of course you did.
I'm just thinking about what the Buddha would say. I always like the part Buddha spoke about. There's the path of not grasping at anything in particular, like not grasping at can be a precept or any rigidity, any dogma way to live your life. If you follow the virtuous or the wise, so that's under some kind of interpretation. But like he spoke like nothing I say is the way. You have everything I say is what I've experienced, and you have to experience it. And so if it's non-harming and it's with compassion, like you said, it's Buddha nature, or then you wouldn't be harming someone. And so I'm not sure where precepts came in. It seems like religions always merge with governments, and governments always have rules for the people. Moral rules, but I mean, that's where I think there's a merging kind of like, and it's good for the people to live moral lives, to get along instead of savages. So, but if everybody was living Buddha nature, there wouldn't be a need for rules or precepts, or because everybody would be living with compassion for other human beings, or compassion and there's that middle way. It's kind of like the string on the whatever they play, the string instrument. If it's too tight, it'll break. If it's too loose, it won't play a tune.
Right.
So the middle way is, the path. Kind of. So like, thank you for the paper.
You're welcome. And thank you because, Nichiren was really very much focused on the inner virtue of the person. The interpretation in his mind of following a person who's virtuous is basically following your true self. It's not following something outside of you, another person or a teacher, even. He was very, very clear in his mind about the inherent ability that people simply have to awaken to. And his idea was that suffering wasn't... suffering was caused by grasping, but it was a delusion about the grasping. It wasn't the grasping itself. I don't know if I can explain that. It was the delusion about attachment. If you're able to see your attachments and use them for transformation, this is different than saying you have to cut off your attachments. This is where he was coming from. And I think that, my understanding is I'm getting more at, I'm taking a class in Chinese philosophy. There's a lot in Nichiren Buddhism, and I'm sure there's a lot in other forms of Buddhism that come from other places they're picked and that, I think there's a strong kind of Chinese philosophical foundation in Nichiren Buddhism. That the idea that life is something to be transformed, not something to be negated. I think the kind of like the traditional, if you will, and I hate to use that term because it's so hard to really say for sure, but the sort of traditional idea, let's call it that, of Indian Buddhism is that suffering is to be negated, that there's a negation involved. Nichiren was about not negation but transformation. It's very slightly different. His idea was that you can be happy and suffer. They're not mutually exclusive. And that the idea is, for him, was that to be able to see suffering for what it is and appreciate its value in your life to help you change that to happiness. And that's a kind of divergence from kind of, I think, how most people come at the Four Noble Truths about the ideas of suffering and how it's dealt with. I won't say what happens to the extinction. What's really going on with suffering. Does that explain a little bit kind of where we're coming from? Yes.
I want to pick up a little bit on some of the things Nicholas was raising, and I'm asking about temptation and delusionment, I guess we're just kind of talking around what it's like. So if it's so within us and so intact, if we do have access to, I guess, the limitless capacities of wisdom, compassion, and courage, or whatever, what's sort of getting in the way? Are there other spirits coming down and blocking us? Are we just, have we jumped off the path for some reason? Is there original sin we've fallen from? Are there other gods like playing games with us?
No, I think it's really, Nichiren is from a tradition of philosophy, if you will, that goodness and evil are united, and that one cannot be a human being without having some of both, and that life is really a process of struggling against that constantly. That there's, entropy, the idea that everything eventually disintegrates, that constantly life is a fight against that natural decline. And that's true in, I think, people's lives. And for me, you hear people say, or I'll just say from my own experience, I've chanted about, I've really chanted a lot about in my relationship with my partner to really to be able to see what's really happening when we get in an argument. And it always goes down the same path. I can't stop it. It's like a moving train, and it won't stop, and I can see it happening, and I can do nothing about it. And I've chanted to be able to see what goes on. And I have, we've been together 10 years, and this has been a 10-year process. It hasn't just magically gone away, and I doubt that it ever will, because it comes back in new forms. I mean, talk about karma, it comes up in new ways. And I think that, simply having the determination or the resolve that I don't want to be in the same place again is an important cause for it to change. And it does change over time. But there's always the pull towards, being negative, wanting to get even, doing all these things. These are things that I don't think as human beings we ever get rid of. It's always a fight. And I think that one of Nichiren's most important writings was, he talks about happiness in this world. He said, enjoy what there is to enjoy and suffer what there is to suffer, and regard both as facts of life and continuing chanting Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. His idea was really that you can't avoid suffering. No one can avoid suffering. It's not possible to avoid suffering, but you can transform it into something. I have taken the most horrible experiences of my life and changed something dramatic and fundamental. And it didn't make the bad thing go away, but it pushed me forward to something greater that I never would have done had I not suffered that deeply. Yes.
I don't see that this teaching is so different than the little Buddhist teachings that I've read. Like I said, I dabble, I'm looking, like I read a book by the Dalai Lama. Mm-hmm. Life is suffering. And transformation. Every single Buddhist practice I've seen is the same thing you're saying, that life is suffering. Mm-hmm. We can't change that. Mm-hmm. But we can't, that's what it is. But we transform how we attach to it and how we interpret it. I mean, that's a Western way of looking at it. So it's interesting the way you speak. It doesn't sound any different than the other forms of Buddhism. Maybe I haven't gotten the fine-tuning of all of them. But I haven't heard this style of Buddhism that you're talking about as being any different. All Buddhism that I've heard about, the Buddhas that you study, bring it to the common people. We're all Buddhas. And that there's nowhere not to suffer. Mm-hmm. That's what life is. Mm-hmm. Life is suffering. Mm-hmm. And so the way to enlightenment is to find that the suffering doesn't make us suffer as much. And that's what the transformation is. So I mean, it's interesting to hear, but I can't find what the difference is between a lot of the other things. Now, this gentleman talked about either your precepts come out of the Buddha way, your practice, or that your practice is the mindfulness of the precepts. Mm-hmm. But it's all pretty much the same. It's just the way you approach it. But I haven't heard anything really different. So it's interesting. I hear this and I'm thinking, well, that sounds the same as everything I've heard about Buddhism.
I feel one fundamental difference for myself is that we are very. I think the idea of not having a priesthood is actually, we would say, or Nichiren would say, was really in keeping with what Shakyamuni was trying to say. I think that, it's not that that people don't get enormous benefit from a variety of Buddhist practices. My brother practices Vipassana, And he has gotten enormous benefit out of his practice. And I don't think that that's necessarily, that's not wrong. And I mean, everybody gets what they get out of their practice. The reason they're in their practice and what they're doing is because it works for them. For me, what works for me is I have stopped trying to not be an angry person. I don't try to not be an angry person anymore. I'm an angry person. This is my sort of set point. Yet I'm looking for the Buddhahood within the anger. Instead of trying to negate the anger, which is where I was at before with my Zen practice, I'm trying to find the Buddhahood within it. For me, the only way for me, speaking only for me, to do that is to chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. I also think that for me, that even though many people get a great deal out of having a personal relationship with either a guru or a mentor or whatever, I'll speak only for myself, there was an inherent danger in me to seek outside of myself for the answers. And, I never really believed in God. I believed in a God-like thing that one could call Myoho Renge Kyo, if you will. But when I started practicing Buddhism, this Buddhism, I had a horrible feeling at one point, a terrifying feeling that even though I never believed in God, I always hoped that there was one, so somebody could maybe intercede on my behalf and fix it for me. This practice to me is 100% about personal responsibility, and that in fact, for me, having a teacher in this, in a sort of guru kind of way, I don't know how to explain it. I don't want to sound negative about it. It was negative for me. I ended up seeking, well, give me the answers. And for me, this was the only way to cut that off. Because I will always look for the answer outside, and that's changed to the point where I always blame somebody outside for my problems. And this is the only practice that I've ever been able to do that cut that off immediately. So I don't think, necessarily the truth of the wisdom or the thought or the philosophy may necessarily be any different than what you personally experienced, but for me, the mode of doing it is different. I hope that explains it a little bit better.
It's basically a prayer.
If we think of suffering as being a cup of poison, this is one of the traditional images, then there are said to be three ways of approaching that. One is to refuse to drink the poison, and that's said to be the Hinayana way, which is not the same as the Theravada, but that is the preliminary way, and that's the path of actually purifying oneself. The second is to sit on the poison, and this is the way of Bodhisattva, who participates to the extent that he or she is able to in the sufferings of all beings. And then the third is to drink the poison down and transform it into nectar, which is the way of the Vajrayana or the Tantra. And there is an extraordinary resonance between all of these traditions that come out of the reform, Tantra talking of in Japan, Nichiren and then Dogen and Shinran, that although they don't say they are Vajrayana, they act in a very similar way.
Very similar.
To transform suffering rather than to negate it or to try to work with it.
Thank you. Again. I'm so glad you're here, Roger.
When I was driving over here this morning, there was a radio program of the young musicians program, I think from the top it's called, and one of the kids played a violin piece called a tarantella, which is a wild dance that you're supposed to do when you get bitten by
a tarantula.
A tarantula. You dance, and you transform the poison into blistering, blasting energy, and you're saved, which seems like an interesting gloss on. Anyway. Come back, sweetheart. Thank you very much.
Over.
That was very provocative.
Oh, darn. I was having fun.
And may you have a vision of your thesis topic soon.
It will bring an end to your suffering.
Oh, yeah, well. No, actually, it won't bring an end to my suffering. It's just create new ones. But anyway. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yay.
Yay. Carl, we have a host. You're our host.
Hey, Carl.
Our Namalong pastries and the usual. You use the teacup, wash it out yourself, and there's Don Ball suggested donation is $5. And do what you can. That's it.
Yay, thank you.
There's a sign-up sheet out by the Donna Bowl. If any newcomers want to give us your name and address to get on the mailing list or the email list. Paul.
I just want to remind people that on the last Sunday of this month, the lesbian song has been invited to come sit with us. So we'd like to welcome some other people to be with us.
Are there any dress codes?
I'm like a lesbian.
The last Sunday is Halloween. Oh my God, yes, it is.
Any other announcements? Okay, let's get in the circles.
Yeah, we are in the channel with Lamio Rengekyo. Hello, where's Snake? We're gonna do Namyo Renge-kyo together 3 times.
For a little more.
What? No. 3 times. The end something is always 3 times.
108 is good.
Oh, okay. No way. Okay, ready? Namyo Renge-kyo. Namyo Renge-kyo. Namyo Renge-kyo. Thank you. Yeah. Hey, next time I come, maybe I should bring an altar and we should chant together a while again.
Yeah.
We haven't done that in a while.
Long time. Good.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.